Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are unpacking one of the absolute greatest David versus Goliath stories in all of medieval military history. We're looking at a kingdom that didn't just survive the massive expansion of the mighty Mughal Empire, they completely dismantled it.
It really makes you wonder, how do you defeat an empire? It's a question that plagued rulers across the Indian subcontinent for centuries. Seriously, how do you stop a force that seems literally unstoppable? Specifically, we're going to look at how the Ahom kingdom, tucked away in the Brahmaputra Valley of present-day Assam, achieved what so many others just absolutely couldn't.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is the core of our conflict. On one side, you have the Mughal Empire, this massive continental powerhouse that relied on sweeping land forces and heavily armored cavalry. Just a giant war machine. And on the other side, you have the Ahom kingdom. Sure, they had way fewer soldiers, but they possessed intense naval agility and an absolute mastery of their complex, river-heavy, hilly terrain. So it's essentially brute force going head-to-head with ultimate environmental adaptation.
Chapter 1, The Unstoppable Empire and its Expansion to the Brahmaputra.
So, to really understand this clash, we've got to look at Emperor Aurangzeb's sheer determination to finally annex the Brahmaputra Valley. But here's a super fascinating detail from the historical records. To lead this massive invasion, Aurangzeb sent Commander Ram Singh I. Now, you might think this was a huge promotion, right? Actually, it was the exact opposite. Ram Singh was sent to Assam as a punishment. Yeah, he was blamed for letting the Maratha king Shivaji escape from captivity in Agra. Back then, fighting in the dense, malaria-prone forests of Assam was considered a totally miserable assignment. So Ram Singh was shipped off there with tens of thousands of Rajput troops, archers, and artillery just to redeem himself.
But it wasn't easy for the Ahoms. Let's talk about a really costly lesson: the tragedy at Alaboi.
In 1669, the Ahom forces were under this immense political pressure to engage the massive Mughal army head-on. And, well, that pressure led to a catastrophic mistake. 10,000. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering number of Assamese soldiers who died in a single day at Alaboi. To put that into perspective, the Ahom commander absolutely knew his infantry was no match for the Mughal cavalry on flat ground, and he desperately wanted to avoid an open field battle. But he was forced by his king to fight on the plains anyway, and the Mughal cavalry just decimated them. It was a really grim all is lost kind of moment for the Ahom kingdom.
Which brings us to the masterminds of the resistance and how they totally changed the game.
See, rising from the ashes of Alaboi, the Ahoms completely flipped their game plan. They realized that fighting on Mughal terms was honestly just military suicide. And check out this quote. What's wild is this isn't some Ahom propaganda. This is actual praise from the enemy. Mughal commander Ram Singh himself was simultaneously terrified and in awe, saying he couldn't find a single loophole in the Ahom defenses. And that single individual he's referring to? That is the legendary Ahom general, Lachit Borphukan.
Lachit was a man of uncompromising, ironclad discipline. Looking at this, the chronicles note a really shocking anecdote that perfectly illustrates how serious he was. During the urgent construction of the Amingan Rampart, which was this absolutely crucial defensive wall, Lachit found his own uncle slacking off and neglecting his duties. And without even a second of hesitation, Lachit executed his uncle with a single strike of his sword, famously declaring that his uncle was not greater than his country. I mean, wow. This brutal enforcement of discipline sent an instant shockwave through the Ahom army, making it crystal clear they needed to gear up for a grueling fight.
But Lachit was smart. He surrounded himself with extraordinary talent. Enter Commander Ismail Sadiq. According to local legend, an unarmed Sadiq literally killed a tiger that had wandered into his village, barehanded. It's an unbelievable origin story. This amazing feat caught the attention of the Ahom king, who promoted him to a Hazarika, meaning a commander of 1,000 soldiers, and gave him the totally fitting nickname Bagh, which is the Assamese word for tiger.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Lachit and commanders like Bagh Hazarika shifted their entire military doctrine. They adopted Daga Juda, or guerrilla warfare. They completely neutralized that huge numerical advantage of the Mughals by flat-out refusing to fight on open land. Instead, they used the cover of dense forests for ambushes and night attacks. They used scorched earth tactics. They cut off Mughal supply lines. Lachit even set up fake peace negotiations just to stall for time while his troops scrambled to build impenetrable mud forts and trenches.
Everything builds to the climax at Saragat, an absolute riverine masterclass. So all these new strategies culminated in 1671 at what would become one of the greatest naval battles in Indian history. The Mughals had dug in on the north bank of the Brahmaputra River with this terrifying chain of gigantic cannons. But Bagh Hazarika proposed a brilliant, super high-stakes stealth mission. It's like a sequence from a heist movie. Under the cover of night, he and an advance party crossed the river by boat. While the Mughal soldiers were distracted, performing their dawn Fajr prayers, Hazarika's men scaled the embankments and literally poured water straight down the barrels of the Mughal cannons. So when the Ahom forces finally advanced and the Mughals tried to fire, nothing. Their wet artillery was completely useless.
With the big guns disabled, the river battle really kicked off. As you can see here, the Ahoms used these small, highly agile warboats known as Bakaris. They also threw fireboats into the mix. The Mughals, on the other hand, had these massive, lumbering ships that were just clumsy and no match for the maneuverability of the Ahoms in the treacherous, swirling currents of the Brahmaputra. It was a total masterclass in using your local geography to obliterate a massively superior force.
But the real soul of this victory came from Lachit Borphukan himself. During the battle, Lachit was severely ill, like practically bedridden with a raging fever. And seeing that massive Mughal fleet, some Ahom soldiers actually began to lose their nerve and retreat. From his sickbed, Lachit demanded, "Carry me on a boat." He literally had his troops load his bed onto a vessel and sail directly into the chaos. Seeing their dying commander refusing to abandon them, it sent Ahom morale straight through the roof. They attacked with this ferocious inner energy and just completely routed the Mughal navy.
Moving on to the final expulsion, the victory at Itakuli. Now, Saragat was a crushing defeat for the Mughals, for sure. But it wasn't the absolute end of the story. Fast forward about a decade to 1682. Emperor Aurangzeb was super distracted by conflicts way down in the Deccan Plateau against the Marathas. That meant his forces up in Assam were stretched thin, weakened, and suffering from terribly low morale. The Ahoms, now under King Gadadhar Singha, capitalized on this timing perfectly. At the Battle of Itakuli, they launched a massive, coordinated, three-pronged advance, hitting them by land and by river. They completely destroyed the remaining Mughal garrison and pushed them all the way back past the Manas River. And that was it. From that point on, the Mughals never captured Guwahati again.
So let's talk about the Ahom military legacy and this incredible underdog's blueprint.
And this brilliantly illustrates what we can take away from this incredible span of history. The Ahom resistance is just a timeless blueprint for asymmetric warfare. Just look at this timeline. In 1669, they were a totally crushed, devastated army, mourning 10,000 dead at Alaboy. But then, just 2 years later, through sheer strategic brilliance, iron discipline, and total environmental mastery, they pull off a tactical masterpiece at Saragat. And by 1682, they had cemented their independence completely at Itakuli. It is just a stunning historical turnaround.
Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. We so often think of warfare purely in terms of sheer numbers, weapons, and wealth, right? But the Ahoms proved that a deep, intimate knowledge of your own environment can actually be your ultimate weapon. They weaponized the Brahmaputra River, the monsoon rains, and the dense jungles to bring a continental superpower to its knees. So I leave you with this. How does geography continue to shape the destiny of nations today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible blueprints of history.